We're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Schaefer, Director of SIP, and I'm excited to be your moderator for Inclusive Preschool as a Smart Investment, Driving Student Success, Family Belonging, and Fiscal Sustainability, presented by Anjanette Pelletier. Anjanette Pelletier brings 25 years of special education experience to School Services of California, Incorporated, including program development, professional learning networks, and expertise in special education legislation and fiscal policy. Anjanette is a respected expert on special education finance and a broad range of special education topics. She leads professional learning and improvement teams and enjoys supporting equity-focused outcomes work related to special education and inclusive practices. Anjanette is a licensed educational psychologist and has supported local educational agencies in roles from school psychologist to associate superintendent for the San Mateo County SELPA. She obtained a bachelor's of science degree in psychology from the University of California, Berkeley, and a master's of science degree in clinical child and school psychology from Cal State Hayward. As we get started, first we have a few logistics. This session will be recorded and archived on the conference agenda page after the conference for 1 month. Closed captioning is available by clicking on the CC button on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. The interpretation icon in the same area will provide access to Spanish translation. We will ensure the ASL interpreters are spotlighted along with the PowerPoint and presenter. Please ensure your volume is muted to avoid background distractions while presenter speaks. And we encourage you to engage with others in the chat and, when possible, keep your camera on so we can see your faces. And with that, Anjanette, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. I didn't realize we were going to read that bio. I thought it was just going to go in a little blurb somewhere that
Of
people who
course, we
were
have to
really
read it.
interested could read. But thank you. It's always weird to find yourself introduced with your formal bio. So thank you, everyone, for coming and for joining me. I'm so honored to be part of the virtual conference that SIP is putting on around innovative and inclusive practices. One of the things that I've been really focusing on in the last 2 years with my work with School Services of California is to encourage districts to really consider what they get in terms of return on investment, because what we all know is that preschool, especially special education preschool, is not an option and it's not free. So we have to really be thinking about what are we getting out of what choices we're making. And that's what I'm hoping that this presentation will sort of highlight for you. A start, maybe, of your journey. Certainly not going to be all of the information you would need. This is me, and hi, I'm here, and that is my email address. I get lots of email from across the state all the time, so you're welcome to email me with questions, comments, requests for additional information. And I do work for School Services of California. We're a private consulting firm that's been around for more than 50 years, supporting school districts and community colleges and charter schools. And I have been with them now for 5 years, leading and working with their special education team. And so we are really excited to be helping school services branch out and do more. And school services is an area of critical need and topic of support. So that's what I do at school services, and we'd love to hear from you. So I'm going to start my conversation a little bit with some special education statistics. One of the things that I find is really important as special education directors, school district teams, those who are looking to be partners with special education programs at schools, sometimes they need some data to influence their school district or their leadership teams to really begin thinking about what does investment in early childhood settings, in preschool inclusive practice, what does that really mean and why might we do it? And so I think one of the founding floors of where we need to be thinking about what we are doing and how we need to do it differently is that we are obligated to provide special education early childhood services to those pupils who are eligible. Our alternative to inclusive preschool practices is not no program with $0 spent. We will never recapture all of the dollars that we need to use to fund personnel, services, placements, etc. Because it's really a mandate that we are to provide those services to our full span of students from 0 to age 22. And so having some data about statistics can really help you locally. So what I have here is a graph from the federal Department of Education and their most recent data right now is back to 2023. But what you can see is that nationwide, as is reflected in California, we have been increasing in the number of students with disabilities that we serve overall. The growth has been primarily the big green bar in ages 3 to 22. We've been growing in school age children and in preschool age children. The little orange bar is infants, ages 0 birth to 3. And then we have that little blue bar, ages 0 to 5 early childhood. But what you can see is that trend has been increasing. And right now, in both the United States and in California, the percentage of students with disabilities compared to total student enrollment is just over 15%. California is seeing that same pattern and trend. But what's interesting about California is we're seeing that percentage of students with disabilities rise even as our state enrollment is declining. That's a critical fiscal point because our federal funding for special education is tied to enrollment, not to the number of students we serve, not to the types of students we serve. So when we are declining in enrollment, we get less money, even though we have more students with disabilities. One of the things that I started tracking 2 years ago because I was seeing such an explosion, like I'm sure you were seeing at the local level, whether you're an interested parent or a district person, is that we have this explosion of our youngest learners in our early childhood settings. And so, what we tracked at school services was what has been the traditional or historical statistical growth year over year for special education. And so, this chart has three columns. The first chart is all students, ages 0 to 22. And what you can see here is that we've had this very consistent year over year growth in special education. So we've been growing, but it's been consistent and fairly low, right? In the mid twos, 2% year over year. And then, of course, we had a dip. We would have expected a dip during COVID when we were shut down, when we were doing distance learning. And then we got a little jump where we had to re-find those children that maybe we didn't find during COVID. And then in 2024, 25, we actually are back down to our pretty statistically average 2.75% of change year over year. And then you can see the middle column, that's school age children, ages 6 to 22. And that trend pattern is even more flattened. You can see that we have that statistical average, a dip for COVID, a little bit of a return, and then back to statistical average for ages 6 to 22. But whoo boy, look at the roller coaster ride we have in our final column, ages 0 to 5. Now, what this shows us is, again, that the trend had been growing, but it had been growing at the same or similar rate as all of the other age groups. You would anticipate that our decline in students that we were able to initially assess for special education dramatically dropped in the 2021 school year. Makes sense to me. COVID was keeping everyone home. We were doing distance learning. Very few children ages 0 to 5 came in to be assessed behind a plexiglass screen with an assessor wearing a mask, right? So we had this big drop in students that we were finding during those COVID years. But then you see, boy, our quote recovery path that started in 22, 23 and into 23, 24, we outpaced our drop from COVID and started identifying and making eligible for special education our earliest learners at rates that were well above what would be a statistical recapture of those students. And it continued for 2 years. And while all of the other age ranges are back down to that statistical normal, our youngest learners are still well above our historical average. So we have this bubble of young learners, ages 0 to 5, who are coming and being referred for special ed, found eligible for special ed, and who are going to need special education services. And I'll just say out loud what I know most of you are thinking. We don't have spaces for all of those young ones in special education only programs. We need to be thinking creatively ahead. Even if these youngest learners are babies, 0, 1, and 2, which they're not all, many of them were ages 3, 4, and 5. They are going to be coming into our schools. And if we don't figure out a way to meet their needs and provide a foundation of inclusive practice, they're going to end up in some of our most exclusive special education settings. And by exclusive, I mean exclusionary, not inclusive, and not with their general education peers. So this tsunami of children is really why I started leaning into this, and I'm guessing that's why you're here. So, what are the things that you need to do at your local level? You really need to start thinking about what are our local patterns and trends. What are your local assessment needs and numbers? What's happening in terms of eligibility? What kinds of patterns do you see that you are needing to address? And then you're going to really have to start thinking and engaging with some of our statewide resources to get some innovative ideas and creative responses. The more you can do to achieve alignment with your other plans and initiatives can be really, really positive. This is a topic that needs to be entire system. It cannot be a special education solution only. We need to be thinking about how we improve our support and monitoring and inclusive access for all students, really reinforcing that concept of rightful presence as early as possible, because that requires mind shift for the adults in the process. Our students manage no matter what we do, right? They thrive when we give them this opportunity, but the adults need some time to be trained up, to build their capacity, to build their confidence, to build their interest, because that mind shift is really critical. Going from these youngest ones need like the most help they can get to they can get that help and excel in my classroom, in my setting. So these are some of the data points I encourage you to start looking at and using in comparison to some statewide data, because it's not just you. The entire state is seeing that growth in the number of young learners, and all of those young learners are going to roll up into our elementary schools. So you're not the only one who's being faced with this new reality. So, what are some of those reality pieces? So, what we're really seeing is the number of referrals for assessment is increasing. The number of more complex assessments and requests for more complex assessments is growing. And we're seeing a lot of these students become eligible, and not all of them are, the most intensive level of need or extensive supports needs. We are still seeing some of the after effects of lack of exposure during COVID years, early language delays or deficits. And what we're also seeing is as these little ones come into our system, they may be underprepared. They may have toileting needs still. They may have some behavioral challenges and behavioral support needs. They may be, have had fewer opportunities to engage with other students or in a more formal setting. And so what we're seeing is a lot of immediate requests for some intensive support, one-on-one support. And some of that support may be valid, but I'm seeing a lot of requests for support for things that are just really developmentally appropriate, especially given our entire age cohort had some developmental deficits impacting them because of COVID. So needing toileting, not a disability. having some behavioral needs to learn how to be successful in a more structured classroom, that's not a disability. But what we have right now is this higher level of student need and sort of a lack of fit right now with our educators, not really knowing where they should be expecting the students to come in prepared. Other things I'm seeing. We had a lot of MTSS, multi-tiered system of support. We had a lot of that growing and rolling before COVID. We'd been doing universal design for learning, UDL trainings. A lot of you had been trying to identify ways to build inclusive or innovative programs. Heard a lot about co-teach before COVID, and almost all of those things need a reset. I'm seeing programs that have lack of fidelity of implementation, lack of consistency, over reliance on individuals, one principal at one site, and they have a great system, but it's not systemic. Some teachers who have received that UDL training and are continuing to implement, and some who really have forgotten their own UDL skills because they're feeling so overburdened right now. We also know that almost all of our students require behavioral supports of some kind. Social, emotional, mental, and behavioral health needs are in almost every single school district's LCAP and in their local initiatives. So we know that all of our students have these needs. It should not be the ownership only of special education, even for our youngest learners, even though we're the only ones who are mandated to offer a service. If we don't start investing in all of those young learners, the challenges they face are going to become only special ed, and special ed is a very costly intervention and prevention service. The other thing I know is that almost every LCAP I read has some sort of inclusive and equity statement included. We say we want access for all. We want all of our students to become meaningful members of society and contributing to their communities. That rightful presence mindset is on the cusp. We've said we want it, but actually implementing it, actually living that walk, living that talk, by reflecting that in our resource allocation and implementation is the next challenge for all of us. The one thing I am happy to see is that inclusive early education is increasing, right? We have mandatory TK now. Transitional kindergarten is increasing. So the number of 4-year-olds that we are having on campuses is growing, growing, growing. And we know that we have a lot of students in our earliest elementary levels as well. Kindergarten, first grade, second grade. As I showed, these kids are rolling up. If they were 3 or 4 when we assessed them right after COVID, they're in first grade now. So we need to continue leaning into those investments as well. Right now, we have a cohort of preschool students who may not actually have a simple transition to an inclusive TK environment. TK itself is a challenge to staff because of how many students there are and how many adults you need. But really, we're all working on the same goals at TK. I know there are some classes that are run a little more structured and some students who may come in at a higher level, but the developmentally appropriate curriculum and content from the TK and pre-K learning foundations really are the same types of skills that we'd be working on in special education. So one of the things that I really find is valuable is to talk about how we know that there are clear benefits of inclusive early education. And I'm seeing this when I go out into the state and I see programs that have really been working to make this real and to implement this in a really elevated way. Those inclusive settings are not just a place where children of all development can engage and be together. It also provides a foundation for strong relationships with families, for the families to learn some of those skills, for other children to see and receive a little tiny bit or a nudge when they may demonstrate a blip in their own skill. It's also an opportunity for all of those children and all of those families to really gel together as a grade level cohort. And so when you have a class of students where the families know each other, the children know each other, the children become almost part of the intervention program. I have observed children who have been with students with disabilities for many years, from preschool into kindergarten and into first grade. And they're the ones who say, "Oh, James just needs his headset. Where's James' headset? That will help James." And they hand James his headset. You get a whole cohort of people who know what their best friend needs. And that's what I mean by saying that the children are ready. It's us adults that really need this push to embrace that rightful presence mindset. I know also that what I see is that the more we make space and support inclusive practice, the more the adults see, oh, this can be done. This is reasonable. This is doable. I do have the skills for this. We're breaking that bond of, I'm not a specialist. I wasn't trained for this. Those children need more support than I can provide them. Those feelings come from a place of wanting to do well and be strong for our students. It's not because people are don't love children, right? But they also get in the way of us giving students a chance. And so what I have seen with my own two eyes is that as educators realize I do have skills, this is doable, there are fewer requests for one-on-one support. And a lot of us think, oh, those requests come from parents. But I'll just tell you, a lot of those requests come from parents because teachers say to them, your child needs more support than I can give them. Once that message is broken, that pathway of I can't support them, so we need more adults to support them, parents stop or reduced, there is a reduced number of requests for those individual services in the places that I have seen. The other thing that happens is those families are happy. Their students are supported. They feel like their students are successful, even when not everything goes smoothly. All of the programs that I've been to, they are not perfect. They have attendance challenges and staffing challenges and a behavioral breakdown one day and, the power and the water go off another. But their families are willing to roll with that because they feel like these people who are supporting my children, these staff, are going to be making sure that my students safe and getting what they want and what they need. And so they're filing fewer compliance complaints. There's less litigation, which also means less settlement agreements, all of which are things that cost money. So there's so many areas where these benefits end up showing up as a return on investment. That's not necessarily a dollar for dollar. I put in a dollar here, I save a dollar there. It's sort of I put in a dollar here, and I have this broad scope of things that could be impacted where my costs can be reduced. And costs also mean the cost of personnel. So many of our case managers are saying, I am overwhelmed with IEPs and assessments and parent meetings and parent conversations and having to do consultation, and I'm trying to teach in a classroom all day long. Well, when you start to think about how to flexibly and innovatively deliver your services, you actually free up space for your support providers. One of the districts that I have been working with that I'm so intrigued by and really proud of, they actually have made sure that the early childhood education specialist is the person who's doing the majority of the daily planning and daily instruction. And that leaves the special educator a broader time frame to be available to support consultation, accommodations, modifications, and have a higher caseload. They actually now have itinerant special educators going between multiple classes, some in Head Start, some in California State Preschool, some of their own programs that may include a balance of fee-for-service families and special education students. And so they're able to provide services to a broader range of students and have time for more of their case management activities. And then finally, we know that students who are successfully included at a younger age are more likely to transition to a more inclusive setting at TK, which means they're more likely to have a window into transitioning to a more inclusive setting at K and into early elementary. If they start off in a tiny TK with 6 kids and 2 adults, there's not a Not very many teachers out there who are going to say, oh, well, I'm ready for them now to come into a class of 20. They're ready, right? The jump from 6 to 20 is a big leap, not just for kids, but for the mentality of us adults who says they've been needing support here. How am I possibly going to meet their needs when I'm with a class of 20? So we need to start again that rightful presence mindset, the consideration of giving them a chance to grow and be successful before we say they need that exclusionary setting. So, what are some of the things that I think are really important for you to have as a foundation for your conversation with your business office is to really know that early childhood education writ large has a research-based large return on investment for your community, for the ability of parents to go to work and be productive members of society to make their full paychecks. It's better for health outcomes for communities. It's also really powerfully important for our youngest learners. We all know early intervention is more powerful and has greater outcomes. The same is true for early childhood education. We know that we are obligated to provide special education preschool for students who are eligible for it under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, right? We cannot walk away from that. So our alternative, again, is not zero. It's not a $0 investment. Our alternative has been costing California millions of dollars. Special education only is incredibly costly for preschool. So there are opportunities for shifting that burden and trying to broaden our exposure. We also know, based on some recent case law, that a limited availability of a general education preschool in your community or in your school district is not a defense for not providing placements for students with disabilities in the least restrictive environment. So, least restrictive environment is supposed to be our floor of consideration for placements for any child with an IEP. They're supposed to first be considered for the least restrictive environment. Again, that rightful presence mindset in a different frame. They should first have access to the least restrictive environment, and that environment is first the general education classroom. So we can't say, well, we don't have general education classrooms. Recent case law in California has said there are general education classrooms at Head Start and state preschool and in community preschool and in private preschool. So again, our window of things we can say no to is narrow, right? We cannot say that our alternative is zero investment in providing inclusive preschool settings. So thinking about how you can make intentional choices and investments so that you can have long-term impact for your system and your students and your community is really where we start thinking about where I'm going to get that payoff, even if I'm not, again, making a dollar to dollar calculation. The educational research shows us that early childhood programs have both academic and behavioral outcomes and benefits. Our students who participate in early childhood settings have higher reading scores, higher math achievement, are more likely to stay in school, are more likely to graduate from high school, have reduced delinquency and crime. They've followed some of these children for 40 years to see what kinds of success they have. And so we know that early childhood education is powerful. This number here, the return on investment to society, is a range from several different research projects, but looking at the early childhood return on investment to society from a low of $1.80, which was when they were looking at just in the preschool years, to up to $17 for each dollar spent when they again follow children and to adults longitudinally. So we know there's universal benefit. Also, for participants, it's not just students with disabilities who benefit, it's all of the students who benefit. And there has been research on the power of having inclusive settings where students who are typically developing with students who have developmental challenges, that they both benefit from being in the presence of each other. Language models, behavior models, social and emotional models are there for both of them, both neurotypical models for modeling and building of empathy, building of community. Oh, there we go. So, what are some of the opportunities we have here in California? California has actually really been leaning in to the early childhood education space. There have been a bunch of policy and fiscal investments in inclusive settings and access in universal preschool, in universal transitional kindergarten, and some funding for those who've been innovating in early childhood education. Now, some of those funding streams are winding down. Some of them represented one-time lump sums, but many of them are moving towards and building towards long-term or consistent annual sources of funding, depending on your level of engagement at the local level. So, one of the things that I think is really important for you to consider at the local level is to really do a survey of what are all of the components that may be available in your community. Even in rural communities where there are fewer options for community preschool or private preschool, or there is no Head Start location, there is still a range of options. The universal pre-K and universal TK continuum really is set up right now to not only focus on how to incorporate and engage and partner with community preschool and California state preschool, but also with childcare providers, all the way into the childcare space. So we know that there's funding for inclusive facilities, for inclusive training and capacity building. We know that there is funding for students who are appropriately served in TK classrooms with the right ratios. There are workforce and innovation grants. So there are still resources out there. There's not all of it is in the school space. Some of it is in Head Start, Early Start, CSPP, California State Preschool. Some of it may be through local foundations or even health foundations. So there, you need to engage in a local survey of what you have within your system. Not a single one of you is going to be able to look at someone else's program and do exactly replicate what they've done, because each system has to be thinking about what do we have in terms of potential partners, potential collaborators, support from our community, support from our resources. Where can we layer, blend, maybe even braid funding for training and for resources? How are we going to make space for each other, the adults, and for our children in those shared spaces? So that is really your first homework assignment, is that in order to really think about where would my investments be the best ones, you need to think about what resources can you gather and where might you be able to find those partners. Because layering of the funding, school district funding with CSPP funding, with community partners funding is very likely to be the pathway towards having more of that return on the investment at the local level. We know that state and federal mandates are continuing and they continue to impact you. I know when I go places, the number one mantra I hear is we need more inclusive settings. We need more spots, slots, spaces for our children to have access. And for some of you, that is, I just want a classroom in the same hallway. Or I just want to be able to use the same playground without having to go on a field trip walk around the outside of the fence, right? We know that those mandates are really going to continue to add pressure. There are more and more school districts who are participating in compliance and improvement monitoring that's focused on their students with disabilities. And for many of us, we've been focusing for a long time on disproportionality issues, over identification of school age children. But right now, a lot of that compliance and monitoring focus has shifted to the least restrictive environment and needing to develop inclusive options, not just for early childhood, but for our entire span of our educational system. So that compliance and improvement monitoring process is another lever for you. It's another potential opening to talk about how your long-term goals of least restrictive environment, of rightful presence concepts, of students truly being equitably provided access and included in those settings, that participation in the LRE is not just a benchmark we have to meet on our annual determination letter, but something that's meaningful to us as a priority under our LCAP, under our strategic plan. When your compliance and improvement monitoring plan starts to match up with and reflect the goals of your community and your school board, that's where you end up being able to have that space for an argument that, yes, preschool is expensive, special ed preschool is expensive. Adding in some extra space because we're going to add in some general ed could be expensive. But then you can also start thinking about what will be your metrics for measuring the long-term impact of that. I have a district that I've been working with who started this journey a couple of years ago, and they have had some really excellent forward-looking projections of how they believe that their investments are starting to really pay off. They immediately felt like they saw some investments, in terms of parent relationships, teachers and related service providers mindset, students being able to be successful and to start developing relationships with other children in their neighborhoods. Those were immediate, but none of those have a dollar amount connected to them. But then they started seeing these happy parents not ask for aids, fewer complaints, no litigation, no settlement agreements. And as those students matriculated up, they matriculated into inclusive TK, and now they're an inclusive K. And so at one point, they had been projecting forward with this growing cohort of preschoolers. I may need 4 special day class kindergartens in 3 classes in 3 years. And every special day kindergarten in my district requires me to have 1 teacher and 2 aides for every 10 children. So I've got, this cohort of 40. That means I'm going to end up with 4 new kindergarten preschool classrooms. How much money was all of that? 1 teacher, 2 aides, plus a whole classroom setup for the students. Well, they said, let's make a plan, try to get as many of our students into general ed K, and it's paying off. Next year, they are having more than 2/3 of those students are going to be included in a general education kindergarten classroom, and they're only going to need 1 SDCK class. So now we have a potential dollar for dollar equivalency, but it's sort of a dollar for dollar equivalency of what was the potential, right? We could project without doing anything, this would be our cost, but it ended up not being our cost. So you have to figure out how to capture that information. When you do something, you have to figure out how to capture it because it's not, well, I spent $1 last year and now I'm not spending $1. It's I'm spending $1 so that I don't have to spend $1. And that's a little bit of a different metric, monitoring, and way of demonstrating that progress to your district. Really capture those inclusive and equitable access goals in your mission and vision. It's in there. I've seen it in all of the mission and visions out there. Make sure that you use that as the consistent third point of why this is so important. So here's some super clear fiscal data. What is it costing? because some of you are offering special education preschool and maybe you are trying to lean in more to general education preschool access as well. So here's what I mean by whew, it's not free. This is nearly 10 years of special education preschool fiscal data. And you can see that the revenue, little green bars all the way across, is minuscule compared to what we need in order to make special education preschool happen. You can see that the total expenses, the red bar, are again far outpacing our revenue. And you can see that what that means is districts need to come up with what we call local general fund contribution, local contribution. So that red bar minus that little tiny revenue is that blue bar left. That is what your district is already contributing out of non early childhood special education revenues because those don't exist. So they are already having these high costs. This is data is expressed in a per millions. So this is our total spending in the state. And so you can see that the amount of revenue required in our state is massive in order to meet the needs of these of our youngest learners. So again, the alternative is not zero. And we can see it's on this upward trend, which makes sense. We have many more children, right? Our other graph was the roller coaster of how many more young ones we are serving. If we don't figure out a way to start thinking about how can we serve more of these children in an inclusive manner, in an innovative way, in the least restrictive environment, underscoring that rightful presence, we're going to continue with out of control costs in early childhood and preschool, and we're not going to build bridges to our general education programs in our school age system. So, again, another data point for your business staff. They are likely to say it's so expensive and we get no revenue for it. I'm not arguing with that fact. What I am saying is you might be able to better leverage some of this spending to build a more inclusive program that could save you money into the future. I think it's really important to be thinking about that intentional fiscal planning. So once you've done that survey of who are your potential partners, where are your options for engagement, now's the time to start thinking about where can we start? Don't start with, by next year, we're going to have 6 classrooms and a fully integrated program with all of our children moving from place to place. That is super challenging to do and it's probably too much, too far, too fast. But you can think about who are your pre-K partners? What are they doing? Where could we share costs? Are they doing this training and we want to do this training? Could we be in the same room with a trainer that we somehow fund together? Could we talk about adopting the same kind of curriculum and having that flow well into our TK programs so that we're not having 9 different curricular foundations and then a totally new transition at TK? Could we invite them to training that we're doing so that they hear some of the same valuable information our specialists get, which might shift their mindset about whether or not they have to refer a student to us? Can we do consultation at their sites, help them with some of the challenges that have been leading to referrals, leading to growth in assessments? Could you be thinking about using some of that special education funding to fund actual placements in other settings? I know a lot of you have done this already, but I'm still surprised when I go places and they're like, oh, well, we don't have any spots. Well, then you could purchase a spot. You could fund a spot in community preschool. You could even fund a spot in private preschool if that was the only option in your community. Are you a district or a community where you might be able to leverage fee for service, a private pay collaborator? I have heard from lots of places where they're finding real success in offering a fee for service pre-care, so like in before school starts, morning care and after care, so that students can have really childcare with their special education and our general education sandwiched in the middle. Families need that in order to be out in the workforce. So, what kinds of resources do you have? What reimbursements and investments are available to you, and income streams from all of those sources? And who are your partners, and how can you think about that layering, blending, and braiding? It does not mean I'm going to take my money and give it to you, or you're going to take your money and give it to me. Actually, there's pretty strict boundaries around that. It also doesn't mean that, we're going to take over each other's classrooms, but there are ways to engage and provide support. I have another story of a district who has a very small preschool number of students because they're very rural. And what they decided to do this year was, instead of every child who needed more than speech only coming to special day class for 3 hours, which is a challenge for the parents, they decided we're going to have some children who come to preschool on Mondays, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, but on every Wednesday, we're going to come to you. We're going to come to the 3 community preschools, and we're going to do a speech, and we're going to do a speech group, and we're going to do some consultation, and we're going to have the OT, and we're going to rotate, and we're going to find you at least once a month, and if not every week. And the number of referrals for students who needed to go from community preschools with a little bit of bump to a full special day class environment has gone down. So just that one day of them partnering with those other educators, demonstrating how to do some OT activities within the play group, has given more students access to some improved practice, and has improved the relationships and also improved the trust from parents. That trust and relationship is cannot be overstated. It is hugely important. Inclusive practice matters, and it builds those relationships. Those families and students who are included develop a sense of belonging, and that reinforces that rightful presence, and it has long-term benefits for the families, the students, and for the local educational agency. If you hover over this little image here of Marie Bauer, this is a Marie Bauer Early Education Center. They are a spotlight winner from the California Early Childhood Special Education System of Improvement Lead, CalEXE. They won an award for their efforts to build their early childhood education center as a fully included model. It didn't start all at once everywhere. It started with a couple of teachers who wanted to lean in, and it has now grown. And they then rolled some kids up to TK and trained an entire TK set of teachers and staff. And then the next year they trained the kindergarten teachers who were going to get those TK kids. So not only are they continuing their own inclusive expansion, but they have now been working with the district to train each new grade level of teachers where their students are being included. And they are finding great success at students staying in inclusive settings. If you click on that, you can watch their video, their YouTube video. It's very lovely. But really, what they did was intentional planning, intentional instruction, and embedded assessment and service delivery. So when you walk into their settings, you don't know who is in special education and who's not. The speech specialist is there working at a table, and there's 5 kids, and you're not sure. Do they all have IEPs? Does one of them have IEP? Do none of them have IEPs? All the kids are getting some benefit of that as part of the language rotation. And they're really seeing that pay off. So a great example of a district that is seeing fiscal benefit. Um, Paso Robles Joint Unified will be joining me in a workshop that we're doing later this month on May 28th, where we'll get more data about their fiscal benefits. Another location that really has been leaning in to starting and working on their journey to inclusion is Marysville Joint Unified School District. They have been working with lots of plant partners as well. They were fortunate enough to get some early grants. They got an EAP grant. They really invested in making sure they had more options and partnerships. They were able to move large numbers of their students from a county program that was really exclusionary just because of where it was located, to bringing them back and serving them in-house. And now they're working on expanding that to offering all of their students more inclusive setting options in partnership with their California State Preschool program. So they had to work on budget alignment, resource alignment, thinking about where we are and where we want to be. How can we make this sustainable? If we have more students with disabilities participating in CSPP, then we'll get a higher reimbursement level so we can leverage some additional funds here. We have one-time funds. We can use those for improving our buildings because we don't want to pay people with one-time funds. They had to try to leverage each piece of fiscal resource along with their people resources. And so they're still in their journey. They are learning and developing an implementation plan. And you can see that they have this little timeline here. And they are just starting to realize we have to capture some metrics about how much we're saving. So that they are also joining me on May 28th. And we're going to be presenting some of their fiscal metrics as well. And then finally, not finally, there are also some really excellent statewide resources out there. The California Early Childhood Special Education Network, CalExE, fantastic resource for you. If you hover over that, that is also a link. And I know that there's some links being added to the chat, but they have examples of program implementers. They have creative and innovative solutions. They have resources for PD, for training, for capacity building, information sharing. And then the California Universal Pre-K Initiative also has had a broad variety of resources for both families and professionals to support collaboration and communication. Again, those relationships are really important. Finally, in terms of resources, I want to highlight that there was an amazing webinar from the UPK initiative in collaboration with Dial, which to be honest, I'm really sorry, I don't know the a full acronym for Dial, but it's a program that helps early childhood leaders expand their knowledge base to begin this innovative practice development. And this webinar was literally called Blending, Braiding, and Layering Funds because it cannot be done without achieving that. And Lancaster Unified was one of their highlight districts. And she did an amazing job of outlining the different pieces of funding that she needed to identify, connect with, leverage, layer, build upon in order to build the program that they are implementing right now. And they're having a lot of success. And they also believe that they are receiving some of that return on investment. Is it expensive? Of course it is, because special education preschool is expensive. Do they have to have additional investments above and beyond what special education preschool costs? They do. They're using their CSPP dollars and their special education dollars and other sources to make that local contribution that's only from the district as low as possible, but also as impactful as possible. So this is also a link. If you click on it, you can watch their YouTube, and there's also right underneath the YouTube is their slide deck. I would really recommend you watch that. It was a very impressive, excellent presentation. So I hope that this was a little taste for you of what kinds of activities and actions you may need to engage in order to think about making those smart investments in early childhood education and preschool. It's not just as simple as, oh, if we do inclusive practice, we'll have less aides. It's not like that, but it could be eventually if your program is built the way that helps your families and your staff feel like they have the supports they need. You need to start with what resources you have, who your partners are, and where you are now and where you want to be. It could be as small as starting with one classroom or one teacher or one student cohort, one community preschool where you develop a bridge and a relationship. It doesn't have to be the whole solution right from the start. And I do think that you'll start seeing benefits for both your students and for your bottom line if you try many of those things. So I wish you tons and tons of best success in your future.
Thank you, Anjanette, and thank you to everyone here today for your continued commitment to students with disabilities and their families. Our shared mission is to design an educational system that innovates, elevates, and creates meaningful, positive experiences for all learners, from early childhood and beyond. For more information, join SIP and Anjanette on May 28th for a webinar titled Inclusive Practices, the Smart Investment for Student Success and Fiscal Health. Thank you all for being here. Have a great rest of your conference.